and I'm the organizer of this panel. And so I want to welcome everybody to this panel. You can see this is a panel on researching transnational migration and education. So transnational mobility and education, opportunities, challenges, and debates. So I want to take a few minutes just to introduce first our panelists. And so I'll spend a few minutes just to contextualize the topic, and then move on to Professor Susan Robertson and Jan Wu can't make it. Susan is affiliated with University of Cambridge and University of Manchester, and so probably she doesn't need much introduction and for this conference. She's going to focus her talk on new imperialism in the making with a question mark. So the geopolitical economy of transnational higher education mobility in the UK and China. So after that, we move on to Professor Yan Guo, who is from University of Calgary, my colleague, and also a family member, who is going to give a talk on mobility and e-mobility during COVID-19. So a narrative inquiry into the wellness of international high school students in Canada. So very often when we talk about international student mobility, a lot of emphasis goes to international higher education. So for this one, it's very unique because it focuses on international high school students. And then we move on to Susie Brigham from Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Canada, and who can't be here today in person, but thank you, Susie, for joining us remotely. And her talk focuses on refugee youth education journeys and strategies for navigating interrupted schooling and migration to Canada. Last but not least, so Dr. Ling Lei and I, we have a joint paper on revisiting education in the age of transnational mobility, theorizing social movement learning for anti-racism movement in Canada. But the last but not the least is Sandra Murchison, who is affiliated with University of Oxford as well as University of Bristol, and who kindly agreed to be the discussant. I know he's still downstairs. He knows we are here, but probably he'll walk in any moment. So a little bit more context about this panel is because I guest edited. There's something, yeah. So I guess I did a special issue on transnational researching transnational mobility and education for the Journal of Educational Philosophy and Theory. So there are altogether 8 articles, and most of them have been published online. So today, just a glimpse of in terms of special issue. Really, really pleased. So these authors are here today to share a part of the special issue. Okay, now let me just see a little bit more in terms of the context again. So in terms of why the focus on transnational mobility. And so you may agree with me, as globalization intensifies the integration of the global economy and also advanced technologies can really kind of greatly enhance the mobility, and the particular mobility of people across national boundaries. So and has manifested in 3 forms of mobility. So these are transnational migration and refugee movement, as well as international student mobility. When people talk about, say, mobility, they tend to get into silos to focus on more specifically on each kind of form of mobility, which is important. So nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, I think when people are mobile, so particularly in a transnational context, say, for example, international students. So I started in the UK at the University of Nottingham as an international student, then moved on to Canada, later became an immigrant in Canada, but still constantly going back and forth, particularly between Canada and China. And last year, I was a visiting professor here, right here at CGHE. You can see it's not really a kind of very simple matter, and it's not unidirectional either. So therefore, I think I see the need in some of focus on personal mobility, particular mobility of human mobilities as manifested in all three forms. That's really the rationale behind the special issue and behind this panel as well. So that's the context. Let me see a little bit more about the conceptual level. So at the conceptual level, so when I did this panel and the special issue, it's very much guided by two concepts. One is the transnational paradigm. The other one is the new mobilities paradigm. So I'm assuming this is not totally new to this group, but very quickly. So basically, under the transnational paradigm, mobilities are seen very differently. So they are conceptualized as circulatory rather than unidirectional and transnational. So moving us beyond the framework of methodological nationalism. So if you're interested, I think some of us have written about this topic and published widely, and also well, basically cultural anthropologists and also sociologists, they have all done a good job and in doing that. And later in education, people in education joined the force in theorizing, I think, transnationalism, particularly in the context of education. So the other conceptual framework, which is important for my work and also for the special issue and also for the panel, is the new mobilities paradigms. It's not really, I guess, new, started by social geographers and later anthropologists, sociologists. So as a powerful discourse that creates its own effects in the context. So the mobility paradigm, also known as the mobility term, so challenges the amobility of much research in the social sciences until recently. So I think, again, these came a little bit later after the transnational this mobility, and particularly, I think, in the new millennium. So these are the primary kind of conceptual framework which guides this panel as well as the special issue. So again, you can see employing a transnational mobility as the overarching theoretical framework. And so this panel examines the emerging trends and patterns of transnational mobility and its relationship and connections with education. And so collectively, we address issues of both mobility and immobility, and also processes of inclusion and exclusion. Because when we talk about mobility, we tend to think, this is one-sided. And particularly when we think about immobility, we tend to ignore the other side. And we tend to think immobility is the opposite of mobility. But scholars of mobility, they argue that actually immobility is not just the absence of mobility. It's often mobility and immobility, they are also often regarded as two sides of the same coin, but which coexist on the continuum spectrum. So when people are mobility, so they can become simultaneously immobile as well. So if you use international students, so they get visa, they get mobile. So if you look at the context, particularly in North America, particularly in US, a lot of international students, they got blocked, stuck, or constrained because of the geopolitical changes. So if you see that while people are mobile, they are also immobile as well. So this is what I think what is exciting, I think, about this panel. And I really want to thank all panelists for being here and also for their contributions. So that's basically my introduction, and I want to stop there just to see a little bit about the format. And so we have basically 4 papers, and also I really want to thank Professor Simon Murchison for being here, who kindly agreed to be the discussant. And so every presenter will have 12 to 15 minutes. And then Professor Murchison will have 10 minutes for discussion. And then hopefully we still have a good chunk of time to open up for discussion as well. So, okay, without further ado. Yeah, sure.
Seriously multitasking here with our windows and different presentations. Here we go. I'd also like to say one of our colleagues, Faisal Rizvi, might have joined us, but he's just had a real tragedy. His wife has just died. But just want to acknowledge really
about now,
Yeah,
actually.
because Fazel's been a long time contributor to these kinds of debates. So
Thank you. Okay, so, can you help us with the sharing part?
oh, okay. At least I can see my PowerPoint side.
Yes, ma'am.
There we go.
So, the
Okay.
shares is here. Can
If you
you
let me do it.
please? Okay. Okay.
Actually, just while they're getting set up, the John Wu and I would have written this paper, came out in 2023, but we
Say it again.
this one.
Yeah.
We would have started writing the paper probably in about 2021, and in fact, actually, in that moment, 22, in that moment, the second of a fairly big forward thrust in UK higher education, or let's say English higher education, global policy developments were kind of put out. And it was really quite telling, and you'll see that in what I actually show as some of the evidence, as to the extent to which there's, particularly in the case of, I'm going to say England, because Scotland has its own policies. It's quite important to kind of recognise that it doesn't sit in the same kind of place. But this was an effort to reach out again, following fairly much, it was quite obvious, the footprint of the old empire in many senses. Let me just go to the full, can you just put it into, but in the time that I've got, essentially, two things I want to say, a couple of things just to kind of, so Chabal kind of introduced it as focusing on the one hand by looking at the mobility paradigm, and on the other, the transnational paradigm. And the mobility paradigm, really, that people like John Ury, who's dead now, and Mimi Scheller and others, they saw it very much as a socio-technical thing. And I remember being in a space with John Ury where the political element of mobility was simply significantly underplayed. So I want to kind of say that to begin with. The second thing on the transnational is that it oscillates between a highly normative internationalization is good and other kind of debate that kind of sits in there, which is, does it sit in the old footprint and shadow of empire? Okay. And we particularly wanted to think about that, particularly as it made sense to us, looking at the English case specifically. But what it did do is it took us back historically. So if you don't know the paper is actually in Education, Philosophy and Theory. It's been out there for quite some time. And it is asking a question of, do we see these, and we look at two cases, the English case and the case of China, and do we see these as forms of imperialism? Okay. Now, what that means actually is that you actually have to then start to do a bit of serious reading about what you mean by imperialism, and you have to do some serious reading yourself as to also how do we understand the relationship between empire and imperialism. And that's a very live debate at the moment in IR studies, in part because we see the fading of an empire, the American empire, and that what you also see then with that is the collapsing of the old so-called liberal order, international liberal order, but fundamentally there'd be a very robust debate out there in IR studies too, as to how illiberal it actually was. So what I'm pointing you to you, pointing you toward, then is quite a robust debate taking place. An amazing paper, David Johnson's just come out in Review of International Studies on going back and then looking at theories of empire and imperialisms. Okay, so I want to make, because I know that there was kind of a debate yesterday, and John and I are wanting to kind of take us off in the direction of also thinking about, do we see these state policies? So we're not talking about individuals' aspirations to be mobile. I certainly was. I studied in Canada at the University of Calgary. These are state projects that get put up, and so where does it kind of really take us? We basically reflect on, okay, first reflection is quite often it's looked at through the prism of internationalism, and I've been in many conferences and so on, and you can see quite a lot of the concepts here. Cosmopolitanism in China, they've got their own Xianqi, and it's sort of a romantic kind of view. But if you look back, and this is an amazing quote from Whitehead, is the need to revive the wandering scholar idea, in part because what would be possible then would be the way in which the Great Britain could actually project something of its greatness. And this is in the 1920s, what we've got in the background and coming forward to with the League of Nations, much later UNESCO, and all of them are pretty much tarnished by the same kind of thing, that the international activities, for example, and in this case, something which could be understood because of its uniformity, even its nomenclature in every country, which looks in any way to Great Britain as a centre of culture. And if you look at the 2021 policy documents coming out, the global strategy again, it's got all of the kind of markings of this kind of sentiment about it. China's different. It's established in more recent years its own scholarship systems, the Belt and Road, and so on. And so the question that we're actually asking here is, can we see these as new forms of imperialism? Now, what happens with the debate in imperialisms is essentially there's sort of two debates that begin to go on. Julian Goh, Michael Mann, quite a number of different writers kind of in there. George Steinmetz more recently, and the kind of early the early kind of debates that begin to kind of set the scene after initially internationalizing this kind of more Whiteheadian kind of understanding. The Marxists come in fundamentally, and this is essentially it's Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, and that imperialisms can be equated to an expansion of capitalism and outward. But as the literature kind of gets going, essentially, what begins to happen is that the idea of empire and imperialism basically gets tied to colonialism, and that colonialism is essentially not okay anymore, means that basically in IR scholarship, the idea of imperialism and empire gets dropped. Okay, yet there's a very robust debate happening about, is America an empire? Julian Goh and many others would actually argue, yes, it is, it has been, and so on. But what then begins to kind of happen, essentially, and I think this is really important for us all to begin this kind of discussion, is that empire doesn't and imperialism doesn't go away, and that Steinmetz and others begin to point to, actually even indeed the anthropologists, sociologists and so on, archaeologists, who get deeply involved, get embroiled in, get enrolled in the development of concepts, for instance, human capital, particularly modernization theory. If you think of Parsons, if you think of all of that lot, particularly coming out of the academy, they begin to develop a form of what you could call as cultural imperialism. Okay? And that then to some extent helps us begin to make sense of the fact that imperialisms are not simply, let's say, a form of control of another territory, but essentially, particularly in the world of education, you might begin to see the world-class university, for instance, the idea of the Western university, or the Whiteheadian view of why you would actually go and access education in the West, and certainly in the heart of the empire. Like Simon, I grew up in Australia, so we're deeply aware of what the empire actually means. So in some sense, imperialisms can be and have been alive and well. They've just not necessarily been the economic form. We can see it taking cultural and political form. So then the question is, do we see, so this is the contrast, do we see in the contrast that we're looking at, China versus the English policy, state policy trajectory as forms of imperialism? And we look at the different policy documents and so on, and make a very strong argument. In the case of England, absolutely. It's about an extension of the capitalist kind of logic, new market making, classic, almost Rosa Luxemburg stuff. Wants the money and the brains, doesn't want the bodies increasingly, and that becomes also somewhat problematic in the more recent kind of iterations of those policies. In the case of China, and this is where I think scholars are kind of differing here, is and we end up in the position of talking about it as a nascent imperialism. Okay, there's a concept. For the West, it tended to kind of sit in and around ideas normatively around cosmopolitanism, and Jiangqi gets put up as essentially potentially a more superior concept. But if we look at imperialisms, what imperialism is actually talking about is the way in which a particular concept, I might just go back here, is where it presents itself as potentially superior and places all others in a hierarchy. So our sense about China is it may be the trajectory. It's not arrived there. I know there's scholars who, and there was a debate, I think one of the presenters, Fei Yan, who would actually say, John and I have not kind of gone hard enough or far enough. But in the case of China, it's telling the China story well. And my sense for the moment is that there's a difference between, let's say, I had the kind of words here, a kind of an effort to kind of rehabilitate what you see as the historic wrongs, and to rehabilitate the reputation of China. Versus imposition. So if we look at theories of imperialism essentially have to assert essentially a superiority, set up a hierarchy, and govern through those logics of superiority and the hierarchy. There are elements we can see that are there. It's definitely, you know, tell the China story well an example of imperialism, so it's projecting outward, or is it simply trying to right the wrong and sort of a moment of misunderstanding? Imperialisms are never simply just like that overnight. These are kind of processes. You know, the British Empire was not magicked up overnight. These are kind of projects that also get rehearsed, reinvented, pushed out again, as we see with the UK or the English global transnational education market policies. So I kind of want to leave it there. I think I've given you enough, Simon, to maybe think with. But I think I've added a third foot to really the purposes of the special issue, which is to try and add power and politics into our discussions of transnational mobility.
Perfect. So thank you. That's exactly it. I got so involved in the presentation, I forgot to keep track of the timing. But anyhow, so our next paper is by Yang Guo, looking at mobility and e-mobility during COVID-19. Oops.
Yeah.
Would you
No. So. I don't see. So basically it's here. It's not, so this one. Yeah.
Basically, it's the military has as well as the this way. And to make a moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you just, you just.
My name is Yan Guo. I'm a professor at the University of Calgary. So I'm here to represent my colleagues Yingling and Aaron who are unable to make it. So it's a collaborative research project. Yingling is a high school teacher and she's also a former PhD student. And she's also international student coordinator. And Erin is a associate professor in language and literacy. So I'm going to talk about mobility and immobility during COVID-19, an inquiry into the wellness of international secondary students in Canada. And you would be wondering now the COVID is over, like why I still talk about it. Because a lot of the issues students face during the COVID period, they actually still have that impact, and particularly for mental health issue. So it's important for educators to be aware of what the students are going through. And even before the pandemic, international secondary students faced a number of challenges, including societal, interpersonal, and individual. And so our research look at what does wellness mean to international secondary students, and also how did the pandemic impact their experience of wellness. And the third one is like not the focus of this presentation. So our study draws on a sociological approach or lens to examine wellness, and when actually identified two dichotomous approaches to conceptualizing wellness. One is from a psychological perspective, means, students are taking care of their own wellness and it's a fixed category. If you are unable to do well academically, it's the student's fault. And then secondly, wellness as a social process shaped by the relationship between an individual and the social and the physical environment. So the former approach actually has been critiqued for its subjection to the neoliberal accountability rhetoric, because there's a trend in Canada. A lot of international students, starting even from elementary now, go to secondary, and a lot of secondary high school students go to Canada to get the diploma in high school, so that it's easier for them to apply for Canadian universities. So there's a path. And then it's a big industry in Canada too for younger international students to make money out of them. It's quite a you would say new liberal approach. And since we are interested to getting better understanding of what the students are going through, and particularly the experience of wellness, so we took the second approach. And then our study draws on also intersectionality approach or theoretical lens to examine and understand their experience of wellness, because intersectionality initially emerged from a critique of failure of, for critical, like CRT, critical race theory, we mainly focus on the dynamics of race, but there's a neglect on looking at the gender issue, class issue, and in our research, we also add international student status and as well as country of origin. Okay. So we look at use narrative inquiry approach of the students and ask them to tell us their own storytelling. And then we did 30 interviews with 30 international high school students in the preferred languages, English, Italian, Korean, Mandarin, Spanish, and Vietnamese. Because sometimes when they told us stories, if they choose the mother tongue, it's much easier for them, particularly to express the emotions and also mental health issues in the mother tongue. And then we also did a focus group interviews with 7 international student coordinators. These are the teachers, high school teachers, who are assigned with extra like workload responsibilities and to look after international students. Some are trained, some are not trained. And then we use semantic visual analysis because we also collected some of the students' artifacts and drawing from the intersectionality analysis, and we did a collaborative data analysis among our team members. Okay, so for students, participants, they came from 11 countries, including, so the majority of them came from China. So South Korea, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Uganda, Cambodia, Germany, Italy, Mexico, Nigeria, and Thailand. And 18 of them were female, 12 were male, and the age range from 15 to 18. And the length of residency in Canada, some were quite like newcomers, so they were only there for 4 months. Some were already, they started from junior high in Canada, so they were in Canada by the time of interview already 4 years and 2 months. They did come from 13 different high schools, so representing, quite a variety of schools. And then 43 of them live with parents. So that means usually mothers who left the home country and stay with the children in Canada just for their education purpose. And then 37% live with homestay. Homestay means they were assigned with the homestay families in Canada, and the student paid room and board, but the parents were supposed to involve them in activities to learn about Canadian culture. 17 live with relatives, and 3% live with siblings. So our findings found that students understood, their wellness in terms of academic dimensions, social, physical, emotional, racial, and financial. And it's also talking about how they are all like, it's not just a, very fixed category. It's not also separate category. They are interrelational and they are also like interactional. So I'm going to kind of quickly share some of the findings. So in terms of academic wellness, they talk about loss of anticipated learning opportunities. And then they also talk about challenges of online learning. And for example, they talk about there's a lack of interactive learning. And also students said when you went online learning, there's like a water down of the content. So it's like lack of academic rigor. And then in terms of control, so some of the students talk about very difficult to have this self-control of routines once they are online because nobody will push you. So, and then, so Luna actually talked about how when she came back from quarantine and she had to do 16 tests in 1 week. So it's very like dramatic for her. But the experience was not even for Sansi. And she talked about because it's COVID, everything slowed down. It's actually she benefits from that. She doesn't have to rush and catch up with others, and she has more time for like a deeper self-reflection. And in terms of social wellness, that not surprisingly, difficult to make a friends, particularly make a friends with local students. And also they talk about the dilemma of ethnic comfort zone. So it's easier to stay Chinese students with Chinese students, and then the parents push them to make a friends with other people to practice English because you are in Canada. And then they also talk about emotional wellness, of course, depression and homesickness and loneliness. And the racial wellness, students talk about anti-Asian, anti-Black, anti-Muslim racism. Because Canada, a lot of people thought it's multicultural country because of multiculturalism. So there's no racism exists in Canada. No, that's not true. So here, students talking about, some friends try to stay with them, and because they were perceived as blamed as a virus carriers. Because you are from China, you have the virus to spread around in school. And also, one Chinese students talk about the shocking, like a sexual harassment by her homestay male host, and she actually went on depression. So here is talking about intersections of racialized scapegoating, national origin. So just because you are from China, then you must be blamed. So this kind of a racism is connected with where you are coming from. Okay, so it's already predetermined. And also gendered racism and international student status. Okay, because for that girl, she found it's very hard to report the instant. She said it might have negative impact on her visa status because she's an international student, and also she's aware with the power dynamics between international students and the homestay parents. And for Black girls, Kyle, 16, from Uganda, she talked about, her ideas. She was perceived as less intelligent because she said her ideas were not taken serious when she was trying to contribute. And also Black English as deficient. So from a racial linguistic perspective, so race is connected with language. Language is connected with your intelligence, with your thought, with your ideas. Okay, and Black students also talk about internalized racism. A Black girl actually from Nigeria, she herself said to us, Black girls are scary. And she internalized that racism with a race linked with a fear. And also, okay, 1 minute. Muslim girls talking about how she was wearing a hijab, and then her peers trying to pull off her hijab and ask her, like, what kind of strange thing are you wearing? Okay, so their experience provide a stark experience of intersectional discrimination concerned with race, Islamophobia, and gender. All right, okay, last minute. I skip this part, mobility, immobility. Yes, okay. So our studies suggest there is an inadequacy of social logical lens to wellness as it does not discuss racism. Sometimes we claim to use a sociological perspective to do our research, but we turn to overlook racism. It's like an elephant in the room. Everybody is afraid of talking about it. there is also inadequacy of intersectionality, as it does not include international student status. So we don't look at their identity status per se and the country of origin. Okay, so the study suggests structural change to resist systematic racism in school. It's easy, and then there will be like a policy, curriculum, and pedagogy, the total change, and also anti-racist education. So we suggest there should be multiple centers of knowledge integrated into the curriculum. It's not just say adding on approach. No, it should be like a multiple centers, epistemic social justice. Value and validate the complex identities of students, and educators explicitly teach anti-racism, which is very rare. I know, at least in my university. And teachers, students, administrators, and community activists to work for change at a broader level. So we need to work with the community, because the education alone cannot just, make the change. So together as a collective agency, we can make some changes. That's it.
Thank you, Yan. Okay, thank you, Yan. And that's our piece on mobility and immobility in terms of international students. So next we'll move on to Professor Susie Brigham from Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Canada, who will present her research on a refugee movement, particularly refugee youth. Susie, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I just want to check that you can see my PowerPoint. Are you able to see that?
No sound.
Thank you. Good morning. We can see your not yet. So can you do a share?
Oh, okay. I think it's on share right now, but
There we go.
oops, can you see it and can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Great. So I will begin, and I'm hoping that if there's any issues, you can interrupt me with when you turn on your sound. There seemed to be a little bit of feedback, but I'm going to proceed, and I hope that you are able to hear and see me. Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today, and I'm so pleased that Shabao has organized this session. And I'm also very excited to share my study that I have done here in Nova Scotia. And I appreciate the organization of the panel. It's been such an interesting way of starting with some theory, some broad theoretical perspectives, and then I appreciate Jan's presentation, because I think we're going to find a lot of overlaps between her presentation and mine.
Okay, Susie, if you want to
Pardon?
Just leave. Go to full
Sorry?
screen.
Are you able to hear me now?
people can see better. So right now people see a very small kind of a screen. Do a slideshow from current slide.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes, okay, super, go.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for making sure that it shows up full screen. Thank you. Okay, so yes, I'm here in Nova Scotia, and I wanted to acknowledge that I am on the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And as you know, this is the homeland of the Mi'kmaq, and it has been covered by the covenant chain of treaties of peace and friendship that were signed in the 1700s. And these treaties are affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada, and they recognize Aboriginal titles. And these treaties are living agreements that establish the rule of ongoing treaty relations between nations. And I want to pay respect to the knowledge embedded in the Mi'kmaq culture and who are the custodians of this land, and to the elders past, present, and future. So I wanted to let you know firstly that the study really came about because of our local Immigrant Service Association here. We call it ISANS, Immigrant Service Association of Nova Scotia. And they were noticing a lot of young people coming from the immigrant groups that were coming to them with significant challenges, and they wanted to know what is going on. They were observing like low proficiency in English and low educational attainment, a social isolation, and discrimination. And so a team, we got together. I've published this paper with two of my research assistants, Sylvia Kalutiad and Claire Beerley. And we set about organizing some research questions, and they are here on the screen. What are the challenges that the young adult refugee experience in Nova Scotia when they're navigating their educational journeys? And what are some of their strategies to persist? Now, the context, I really wanted to emphasize the important role of schooling. And I think a lot of us can recognize this role that schools play in terms of acculturation processes, and how schools are often really the first to introduce immigrant children to their new national culture, as well as help students to manage their intercultural dynamics. There's not a lot of research done in Atlantic Canada. I'm on the East Coast. Shabao and Yan are out on the prairies. So there's a big distance between us in this country. And there's not a lot going on with research in the Atlantic region, particularly in Nova Scotia. So I just want to get right to my methodology and talk about the approach. It was a qualitative approach. I'm just skimming over this quickly just to give you a sense of how we obtain the data, one-to-one interviews. And the data was collected during the COVID. So I appreciate the fact that COVID is over, but it definitely had an impact on not only research, but it's continuing to have an impact on the way that people are interacting with one another. And then our participants, and I have a slide here just to give you a sense of who we were able to interview. We had 24 participants between the ages of 16 and 26, and we worked with students from 9 different countries. And you'll see on the screen here the pie chart. I know you can't see the names of those countries, but just as an example, Congo, Eritrea, Guatemala, Honduras, Jamaica, El Salvador, Somalia, Sudan, and Syria were some of the largest groups that we worked with. And all of them experienced some form of interrupted schooling. And that meant that they were out of school, or maybe they were in school, but then had to leave it for a variety of different reasons. And they're being refugees. A lot of them had experienced war or displacement. And some of the participants had never, ever been in a school. So now I don't really need to talk too much in depth about my theoretical framework, because thankfully they have been already talked about a little bit here this morning. So the intersectionality, very critical for our analysis. And it's, as Jan had already said, it's looking at multiple intersecting identity markers. So not only gender, but looking at race, class, ethnicity, age, religion, and also, immigration status, because as I mentioned, these were young people who had come to Canada as refugees, and looking at those identity markers in an intersectional way. And then transnationalism, looking at their lives and recognizing, as Shabao had said at the beginning, about recognizing it's not a linear process, but recognizing that they're connected. The young people here that I worked with are connected across many nations and different societies. They construct social fields every day in their practice, and And what we're attempting to do is to capture the characteristics of transmigrant experiences by examining the complexity of those social fields that they have been developing, and to look at the social dimensions of globalization. So I was interested to hear about Jan's study, because I think there's going to be, I see a lot of overlap with what I found here in Nova Scotia with what Jan was discovering in Calgary, Alberta. And so I'm just going to be putting up on the screen some of the voices of the participants, and then I'll talk ever so briefly. I'll try to keep it short and sweet. But I can imagine that you would all understand that proficiency in English is going to be one of the key challenges of the young people who came here. And you'll see some examples on the screen here from Gloria, who's 22. And she said that she was so frustrated in the school system, she wasn't learning. So she actually went to the public library. And a lot of our public libraries, probably the same in many countries, they're free, accessible, and there's often a volunteer program where anyone wants to come and learn English, practice their English. Those opportunities are open. And it was interesting to find that the young people found those volunteer opportunities better than the school program. I'm just going to go to the next slide, because I think this is very telling, and perhaps not a surprise as well, that often young folks who come to the school system are often put into these sort of remedial programs. So this young person, Zuri, talked about being put in with youth who have disabilities, and that they were being taught the ABCs. And of course, you can imagine the indignity of feeling this necessity of going way back to the ABCs. When they can speak English, they have some challenges with writing English. And you know, maybe they needed to brush up on their English language skills. But that's an unfortunate way to welcome young people to the country, is putting them in with a group that actually is not appropriate for their skills and knowledge. A second theme that really popped up here, and again, is around social attachments. I saw some reflection of this in Jan's presentation. Saida, for example, she said, "I'm afraid that I would get judged. I don't even know how to start a conversation with some of these students. Back when I was in Africa, it was a boarding school, so it was easier for me to make friends." And Lucia said that English is so hard for me. I don't have relationships with other people. So that experience of social attachment was a significant challenge for the young people in our groups. They talked again about experiencing racism, being ostracized because of some of their cultural attire that they wore, whether it was a hijab or what this particular person, Sarah, talked about the color of her clothing. And yes, and racism, that was another key experience. So moving along, the other large theme that kept arising from the data, which were the transcribed interviews, was around gender. And a lot of the young people talked about not having access to schooling because they had chores to do at home. Some of these young women had children. So although they were in high school, the high school did not acknowledge that there are students who are mothers and or are pregnant. So there was a challenge to try to access schooling, get to class on time, and participate in schooling because of a lack of childcare. And then, of course, Zuri, another example here, who talked about having to do chores where her brother didn't have to. Wathika talked about the early marriage, forced marriage, and having to give up schooling because of these cultural practices, and particularly coming from the refugee camps like Wathikwa. She talked about this was one of the alternatives for economic reasons, was to marry early at 15 or 16. And she talked about how her sisters were all married very early. And of course, that's going to have a big impact. The experience of trauma and lifelong learning, this was something that I believe Jan had talked about as well, but not having the opportunity to have those traumas dealt with, and having gone through war, This young person, Abdul, I wanted to mention him because there's a quote of his up on the screen. He said that he didn't get to finish grade 1. And so after the war, because of the war, and that he began working at the age of 8 to support his family. So just coming up to the last few points I wanted to make was to summarize some of the main discussion points. A key piece was how their previous educational experiences were ignored or undervalued. And by educational experiences, not just the formal education, but some of those informal experiences they had, such as, dealing with money at the age of 8 and working in a business when you're not even a teenager yet. Those experiences should never be underestimated. They talked about like being put in remedial math when in fact they knew mathematics, but the teachers assumed they didn't know anything about any subject because they couldn't speak English. All of them talked about their teachers in very glowing ways, about them being friendly and patient, but significantly, we recognized that the teachers were not very effectual in helping overcome, for example, trauma, or helping them to advocate, understanding gender differences. And so just the last slide to wrap this up. Again, some overlap with what Jan had presented before me, and I really appreciate this complexity that we're both bringing, recognizing the gender sensitive nature of migration that really needs to be understood and explored even more in depth. A trauma-informed approach. All of the refugee youth that we worked with had experienced some form of significant trauma. And then also looking at exploring multiple identities and looking at non-English centric pedagogy. This can be done. We assume that English, because it's the medium of instruction, along with French here in the province, we can be doing more to help get away from that focus on English as the sole reason for why young people need to be at school, and to better prepare our teachers. I teach in a faculty of education, and I truly believe that the education system for teachers, like the Bachelor's of Education programs, could be doing so much more to prepare our teachers to support refugee youth. There are so many more refugee youth coming into the community and showing up in the schools. So there needs to be an emphasis on understanding their strengths, their assets, fully understanding some of their life experiences and the knowledges that they bring. So it's not just down to what grade did you finish. And then if you wanted to know more, I just wanted to put up here on the screen the title of of what the study was, acknowledging Claire Brearley and Sylvia Kalutied, who both worked with me as research assistants on this study, and is published in the special issue of Educational Philosophy and Theory. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I want to thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I'm glad everything worked out well. So I hope you can stick around for the large group discussion. Yeah. Our last presentation is by Lin Lei and myself.
Yeah, just open that one up. You. Do that.
Okay. Wrong one. So can we stop sharing? Stop sharing. Stop sharing. Stop sharing.
Slow down a bit. Slow down. Over here.
No, that's my teaching.
Mute on, stop sharing. Start a new one. Keep getting the wrong way.
Good morning, everyone. Or I'd say good afternoon because it's officially past time. Thank you so much for joining our session, our State Mini session. And also thank you to Susan and to Yan, to Susie for your critical insights and empirical evidence. So my name is Ling. I am a recent PhD graduate from the University of Calgary and currently working as instructor designer at Western University in London, Ontario, in Canada. Our presentation today will look at mobilities and educational inequalities from the anti-racism social movement learning perspectives. So I can move to the next slide.
Otherwise.
I think keep moving. Yeah. So hopefully we can get through everything in my outline of presentation. So I'll take up the easier work of presenting. So hopefully my supervisor will take the more challenging job of answering Professor Martin King's answers questions. So in this presentation, we'll present our analysis of learning in 3 anti-racism social movements. Our research is situated in the Canadian context. So Canada. So should I present or? So Canada is the first country to proclaim multiculturalism as its official policy for managing diversity, and it has been celebrated as a very successful model to govern cultural pluralism. But critics have also argued that this model actually evades the critical question of racial inequality and structural racism. And essentially, it sustains a racial hierarchy premised on white supremacy. So the tension between systematic racism and the pressing need for racial justice revealed itself during the pandemic through the many incidents of racial discrimination and the anti-racism movements by racialized minority people. So which urge us educators and scholar activists to examine how and what learning was enacted in these movements so as to inform our research and practice work with racially marginalized learners in higher education and beyond. Maybe I can move it here. Our research is informed by critical race theory, and the hallmarks of this theory includes that the belief that racism is normal, not aberrant, and interest convergence or material determinism, race as a social construction, intersectionality, voice or counter narrative. Much emphasis in educational research has been placed on the social construction of racial discourses. Thank you. On racial, the social construction of racial discourses, and such take of CRT is evident in the deconstruction of race neutrality through individual storytelling and discourse analysis. And educational change espouses strategies such as developing awareness of discursive racialization, counter storytelling, challenging racist attitudes, promoting cultural understandings, as well as integrating multiple centers of knowledge. And the foundations of CRT have also been articulated as 4 things. So in addition to the tenets we talked about, it also includes revisionist history, critique of liberalism, and structural determinism. Leading CRT legal scholars, Delgado and Stefan Chick, pointed out that there are 2 contrasting camps of interpretation among CRT scholars, including the idealistic or cultural versus the realist, materialistic. And the approach of focusing on the narratives and discourses of race in much educational research echoes the former. And the latter view, which foregrounds racism as material condition and material consequences in society through routines, practices, and institutions, contends that racism is more than ideological, and so that demands changes in a more substantive matter. So this aspect concerns the theme of structural determinism, the idea that our system, by reason of its structure and vocabulary, is ill-equipped to address certain types of wrong. And we believe that a key implication of these 2 camps or dimensions, aspects of CRT is that in order to combat the structural and cultural aspects of education sustaining racial injustice, we need to encourage and experiment transformation with the creation of new vocabularies, new routines, practices, and institutions. Moreover, we recognize that the development of CRT have centered the experiences of non-Black minorities, in addition to the experience of Black learners, through the frameworks of Asian Crit, Tribal Crit, and Lat Crit frameworks. And so in our research, we draw on CRT tenets to analyze the learning of 3 racialized minority groups as anti-racist praxis. In the Stop Asian Hate movement, their anti-racist praxis has a focus on consciousness raising by critiquing racist discourses and stereotypes while creating counter-narratives, such as protest against the racist rhetoric, creating placard slogans, as well as showing up in protests and with these slogans. So these are some of the pictures of people protesting in the movement and the slogans that they created. And other strategies include online petition, blog posting about their race-based learning and sharing their personal experiences and opinions with news media. For example, an Asian PhD student wrote in the news column that even she's well aware of the theory of critical race theory, she was still shocked when she encountered racist treatment during the pandemic. And such encounter prompted her reflection on racism by building connections between her Asian appearance and the discourses of Asians as foreigners, as yellow peril, and the model minority. And strategies, it also includes social media hashtagging as succinct counter-narrative and grassroots initiatives such as the founding of Stand With Asians Coalition and some more established NGOs launched anti-racist public education initiatives. For example, on the left, you see volunteers from CCNCJ-SJ or the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice walked onto the street and distributed sanitizers to pedestrians with the message of stop the spread of racism to raise their awareness. And on the right is a picture of the founder of the Stand With Asians Coalition, Doris Ma, with the other leaders of this organization. So in the pandemic, they initiated the campaign of a National Day of Action Against Anti-Asian Racism, which was successful, and that earned them an intercultural trust award by the provincial government. And we believe that this is a very typical strategy of interest convergence, because it still fits the interest of the existing racial order without making any structural or fundamental change. And so the Black Lives Matter movement, I believe it should be maybe the most well-known among the three. So their creative anti-racist strategies include rejecting existing discursive framings, critique colorblind institutional practices, obscuring systematic oppression of Black people in Canada, developing Black-centered alternative vocabularies, actively defining and elaborating discourses about BLM, abolitionist counter-narratives, and again, social media hashtagging, and also identifying hidden gaps in discourses of racial significance. For example, Black leaders from the Alliance for Healthier Communities issued a public statement on COVID-19's pandemic on Black communities, calling for the collection and exposure of race-based data, which the government was reluctant to do. And also, there's direct engagement in the social movements, and they also use their experiences of direct engagement, and they document their experience and use that to inform further community action. And most importantly, they build new establishments and programs, advancing a Black-centered agenda, creating alternative solutions to the routines, practices, and institutions. For example, the Black Mutual Aid Fund was established to provide financial aid for Black people in need. The Wild Seed Center for Art and Activism in Toronto provided a sustainable and permanent space to support activism and education through art. And a Freedom School was established to offer queer positive summer programs and other educational resources to engage Black children in Black liberatory education and campaigns. And Black teachers in the Toronto District School Board developed a course on anti-Black racism for grade 12 students, guiding teaching and learning activities focused on anti-oppression, critical race theory, and critical thinking.
Really interesting.
So moving on to the I Don't Know More movement, this is an indigenous rights movement, and they also foreground the violence both in history and today against Indigenous people, and during the pandemic, the uncovering of over 1,300 unmarked graves near former residential schools. Also, and they also foregrounded the issue of violence against just people. Yeah. And so their anti-racist practices include the healing walks and also remaking their Indigenous presence through digital platforms, including websites, blogs, and social media. And also using the objects to represent their suffering, such as the orange shirt and children's shoes, as making their presence visible. So these are pictures of the orange shirt and the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and also the display of children's shoes after discovery of the unmarked graves of the indigenous children. So to conclude, our analysis indicates that contemporary anti-racism social movement learning continues the tradition of critiquing discursive racialization and elevating the voices from racialized communities. It builds up knowledge about race and class-based material struggles, and meanwhile, a CRT perspective illuminates notable trends of anti-racism learning practices to further the theorization of social movement learning. First, while social movement learning still revolves around consciousness raising through critical reflection to deconstruct discourses fueling racial injustice, there's increasing anti-racist efforts to create counter-narratives that push ahead with racial justice imaginaries. Such counter-narratives manifest unlearning of racialized framing that constrain possibilities for change and creating alternatives through dissent to transcend existing normative orders. And second, in the current moment, social movement learning is increasingly shaped by both idealistic and materialistic claims, and such an increasingly intersectional understanding of racism, necessitates a strategy of intersectional alliance to deal with the complexity of racism in a super diverse society of Canada, as in other immigration countries. And anti-racism social movement learning in intersectional alliance demonstrates cross-racial and transnational learning. And third, counterspaces, multiple counterspaces were created, not only in commonly recognized social and physical settings, such as in protests and classrooms, but also emerging new spaces, such as new art centers, initiatives, new programs, to critically and creatively engage the collective, to turn common spaces into ad hoc political spaces, such as using social media. Our analysis resonate with CRT scholars that counter-narratives as voice characterize much CRT-informed educational research. However, the transiency of public attention in the media on these movements also plunges us into thinking whether voice is enough to drive us toward social justice. We would argue that counter-narrative as voice can be a starting point, but not an endpoint in CRT-informed educational research. Rather, our research should conduct a deeper analysis of racism that involves both idealistic and materialistic concerns to seek solutions that engage both voice and praxis for material racial equity. Such combination of the voice and praxis is vital to mobilize learning as enactment of multiple forms of agency to combat racism through critical, creative anti-racism struggles. From this perspective, we suggest that future anti-racism educational research and practice identify and further engage with creative forms of social innovation and intervention, such as artivism, intersectional organizing, and new forms of counterpublics to enact anti-racism praxis. And it is time that CRT-informed educational research embrace a form of criticality against racism beyond voicing toward practices of critique and creation of alternatives. In this way, we can commit to truly creative strategies to inspire our continued collective anti-racism struggles. That's the end.
Thank you so much. There you have it. So I guess, yes, again, this piece.
Simon's going to comment.
Yes, that's right. So there you have it for basically 4 pieces, 2 theoretical and 2 empirical studies. It's a nice mixture. And apologize for the extra time we spent on the troubleshooting technical. I want to thank Ina for the help. And because of all that, we took a little bit extra time. If people are okay, probably we can stand by 5 to 10 minutes for discussion. If you are hungry, I understand. If you are willing to stay, and then so we can stand probably for a few extra minutes, because I really want to hear Professor Murchison's comments. So, Sam, go ahead.
I won't say much because I think you are probably hungry at this stage. Just some brief comments about
all the presentations. In Linglei's and Chibao's presentation, the last one we heard, I mean, what it made me think about was this relationship between the ideational cultural understanding and the material realist understanding. And what's really interesting is the conjunction between the two, obviously. So you see with Black Lives Matter, this effort to institutionalize anti-racism. So in terms of formal structures that will have an ongoing character. But there's an interesting kind of intermediate form here as well in these examples as well. The use of ritual, the creation of language, vocabularies, that sort of sits between consciousness raising and embedded institutions. And I mean, when you're doing that much with the common culture, you are beginning to produce something which is reproducible. And I think that's pretty imaginative and interesting and quite complex to execute. A lot of overlap between Susan Brigham's, Susan B's presentation and Jan's. I mean, I think a very familiar set of problems for those of us who've worked with mobile students and refugee population. So we have the problem of the kind of de facto assimilationism of our institutions, that they need to homogenize everyone who's different who's coming in and so they can process them in a common way with others who are also defined as different in some way. So you get this process of refugees and disability students being sort of treated as, not normal in conjunction and in the same way, which is obviously going to work against the success and the trajectory of refugee students and maybe disabled students as well. Because we know about the entry of people into new cultural zone is that it's about multiplicity, it's about dual identity, it's about the importance of retaining and respecting heritage and home country cultures at the same time as acquiring and engaging with, connecting to country of education, country of residence, and being able to manage those two things together in such a way that agency is being built and not subtracted. And those examples, I think, all point to that core problem of how you build agency in that context, and obviously acknowledging anti-racism as a central aspect is one of those things. I think that point about where do people come from, their country of origin, the importance of that, of identifying that and working with that. Susan R. gave us some really interesting points to discuss, which we could talk about at length. On the empires, I think this is very pertinent to our understanding of mobility now in the higher education sector, the cross-border activity of higher education. Because, empires are often cosmopolitan. They can manage difference. They have a center, they have a core, they have a national core. And are usually a capital city, or perhaps in the case, and I think you're right about the post-1990 American hegemony, the post-1945 American hegemony, it is definably an empire. Yeah, you could understand it that way. And in that case, there's probably more than one capital city, although the US-based capitals are the most important. And London is clearly a capital within that framework as well, in a sort of somewhat subordinate, but in its own eyes equal role. So you've got this dynamic whereby difference is kind of safe because it's managed by the empire. There's security for mobility, and we have this, and you have normative internationalization. This view that internationalization, cross-border activity in higher education, research, student mobility, faculty mobility is a good thing. It's always necessarily going to be adding value without much inquiry. That was the normative internationalization was our view, but also the view of our states most of the time. With some blips, and migration policy never quite collapses into normative internationalization. But there was a long period there where what we were doing was seen as mainstream and positive by our states, perhaps not always by our societies, but certainly by our states. And now you get the situation where the other form, the nation state, is crowding out the empire perspective to a degree. And certainly it's shaping the view of states, the nation state, in a stronger way. And the nation state is homogenizing, bordered, not comfortable with free movement, particularly, and it's problematized cross-border research links and student mobility. Of course, you can have it with your allies, internationalization now, but with countries that are not allies of your country, there are problems, there are issues, and certainly needs to be regulated much more than it was. So we're floundering with that, and we don't know what to do with it. We think open borders are a good idea. Open science is a good idea. Freer student mobility is a good idea, and that's not got enough traction now. And of course, there's no alternative paradigm that we have. China as an empire, isn't that an interesting question? I mean, I spent a month a year in Beijing, and I work at Tsinghua, and that is getting about as close as I will ever get to this problem. So I think about it a lot. And my feeling is that it's indeterminate yet. We don't know yet how this is going to evolve. My sense is that what China has done since 1949 is that it's built itself as a nation and defended itself, and it's still defending itself. And that's an important part of the nation state, if you like, in China, the defensive aspect. But building capacity and consolidating the relationship between the nation state and the population, the surveillance of the population being part of that, of course. So you've had that process of it in some ways inward building. And the whole question of China going out, which is now talked about a lot more, is it's not quite clear what that embodies yet. I mean, Belt and Road we can see. I guess that we can look at this problem empirically. We can look at it in terms of political relationships, economic relationships, probably cultural ones. The Martin Jacques point about China, which I find his analysis quite convincing in many respects, was that eventually, with the great political economic power of China, the cultural power will follow. And I don't think that's really started to happen much yet, and language is a barrier. But there's going to be a process of increasing reaching out. That's certain. And there's an asymmetry. I mean, your point about hierarchy is a very good point. I mean, the relationship between China and other nations, I think, is you can detect hierarchy in the way that relationship is constructed. Belt and Road structures, to some extent, loan arrangements lead to that. The relationship with Africa and Latin America, I think, is the one to watch, because basically China's essentially worked on its border. Its international relations are conducted at its border, but there's now this reaching out across into other continents, which was very rare in Chinese history. You know, there was the Ming Dynasty voyages, famously, but there wasn't much else. So this is a new thing. And is that relationship an imperial relationship? Well, I think time will tell. Time will tell. Clearly, there's a space there opening up for other powers other than the United States. That's clear.
So can I make a distinction there? Because there's a distinction that's made in the literature between imperializing and empire. So empire is an outcome, but imperializing are then processes and projects and things like that. And so to some extent you can see, which is why we call it kind of nascent and question mark. Yes, we can kind of see those movements. Whether it ends up as an empire is an empirical issue. Okay? And we're not there in that moment, as it were. And what's interesting in the IR literature is for a long time it was all kind of tacked on to military, you know, but essentially the Americans who have an empire are fading one at the moment, but nevertheless, because there's no direct military interventions, although we know they outsource quite seriously in that sense to, you know, proxy wars and all that kind of thing that took place. So those distinctions, those become really important. And I think then maybe apropos, I wasn't here for the conversation yesterday, it's that finer kind of reading amongst the IR, in the IR literature, for example. So they're realists, essentially, they say, well, we don't see military, so therefore we don't see it as an empire. But actually that's kind of being dismissed by the writers who write on Steinmetz and others, where America then begins to use other resources, cultural forms. So, for example, modernization and so on. And the Academy gets seriously involved in that. You know, the Rostow, they're all to work after the Second World War to actually come up with concepts to push out and make the American empire. So,
I just had 2 points there. I mean, I think you're right. And one is that there's a problem about Han superiority. You know, this is something to think about a lot. well, we know what the costs of Western superiority have been, and they still are very severe costs in terms of the relationship with the rest of the world and the way in which the West lacks self-understanding. You know, it doesn't see itself as a culture, it doesn't understand itself as a culture amongst multiple cultures, but as the norm and the universal. So there's a lot of unmaking of that yet to be done. But this could happen with China as well, and maybe is already happening in some respects. And this is again what Martin Jarck talked about. So that's one thing. The other thing is it isn't just about China and the world; it's about what other rising powers are doing as well. And I mean, a lot depends on the relationship between India and China and the way that evolves. It's already a really crucial trading relationship. It has the potential to be the largest economic trading relationship in the world. And you know, it's obviously a relationship which has got tensions in it. There's also cooperation as well. And, you know, I think politically it's very interesting. Watch that space. And it's not just about India. There's also Indonesia, fourth largest population, although it won't be soon because Nigeria will go past. And Iran and Brazil and the big places. So you could have, I think, the beginnings of multipolarity, not just bipolarity as we clearly have now.
Thank you so much, Samit. No, that's exactly, I think, just a little bit over 10 minutes, so 11, but that's really great discussion. And thanks, Susan, already for the clarification. Can I invite Yan and also Lynn to be here? And Susie, if you're still there, could you turn your camera on so you can join the large group discussion? Yeah. So yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Decided to.
Okay. So again, I want to thank all the presenters, all the panelists. And there you have it, 4 exciting papers, and also in the 10 minutes discussing, you know, you can see Samit shared quite a bit. I think capturing, I think very much what we're doing in problematizing a romantic notion of mobility. We want to look at both mobility and e-mobility, the process of inclusion and exclusion. So can I invite the participant in terms of comments and questions? You can say who you are, where you are from, and also be brief. So we can take probably at least one round of questions, and then we invite the panelists to offer their comments and the feedback. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I'll be very brief. My name is Andrew. I grew up in Canada. I did my undergrad at UBC, now at the Institute of Education. My supervisor is just over there, actually, Vincent. So building off of your earlier comments on building actual agency, when you look at idealists versus, you know, realists with immobility of students, when you talk about anti-racist sentiments or education, any sort of pedagogy or implementation of policy to change curriculum, my question was for Professor Yan. Sorry, yeah, the name tag's hard to remember. My question is there any capacity in your research method for cross-cultural comparison or even cross-provincial comparison? Because of course, legislation is different from province to province on indigenous education, for example. I grew up in Winnipeg and we learned a very different curriculum with regards to indigenous education as compared to Vancouver. So that my question is that, sorry, it's not as concise as I said it would be, just because it can sometimes become a political, social, or public question if it's politicizing children or education in children at that stage. So I'm wondering if there's any cross-cultural comparison that can be drawn.
Thank you, Andrew. It's good to have you from UBC or Altamita as well. So I saw a hand over there. Please
my name is Stephanie Allais. I'm from Witwatersrand University in Johannesburg. I just wanted to, I found the panel fascinating because I felt like there was a bit of a gap in a way. And I thought that if we take Susan's point seriously, that international mobility for the UK is largely about economic imperialism, both in terms of resource extraction through elite mobility and in terms of the economic migration of refugees, then it feels to me like all of the initiatives that we're looking at about cultural, it felt like there was the intersectional analyses and the interventions were very focused on race and gender, but not on class and not on international class dynamics And even the nationalism that Simon is talking about in the end is partly fueled by the fact that elites have depended on economic refugees as a way of getting cheap labor, and have built a world order in which they have to do that. And now the teachers are told, you've got to cope with this somehow, and people don't like it because it's cheap labor undercutting local labor markets. It's that kind of complex set of contradictory dynamics, which I felt to me like it was a bit of an elephant in the room in the presentation.
Yeah, such a lot of dynamics and complexities. Thank you for the comment. So we invite panelists to respond later on. So yes, Shauna.
I'm Shauna Wang, recently graduated PhD student at the Department of Education here at Oxford. So I think my question is building on the conversations you had before and is specific to Professor Susan Robertson. I'm just wondering, so if imperialism and those power dynamics behind the same, so what might be you think the imagined hope for higher education in the future, and what might be the possible higher education that you are assuming that we as a researcher in higher education should be devoting to in building on?
Great, thank you, Shauna. Any further comments or questions? No? Okay, that's good. Probably we can start from Simon if you like to offer any responses to all three or any of the questions.
I mean, I agree with what Stephanie said. I mean, I think that bringing the material into conjunction with the culture is really what we need to do. And when we're talking cultural topics, we can't neglect that. The gravitational pull of power and economy. In relation to Shauna's point, difficult. I think that we can't take the state out of the picture, but there's also a bottom-up dynamic in higher education, intellectual work. There's a state-determined order. There's the interstate determined order, conflictual or if you like, coordinated. But below that, there's what we do socially with our direct associations with each other across borders. And we have a facility to continue to talk to each other regardless of the regulatory environment, unless it gets very, very tough, very, very conflictual. And actual formal barriers are created so you can't communicate and see each other anymore. So there's a great deal that university people can do, but universities as institutions are embedded in state structures. Very difficult to expect we can't expect our university presidents to maintain a kind of autonomous or independent course. But we can expect ourselves to do that. I think we should, and we do. We're doing it here.
I'd just say, I mean, I think there is a difference between the kind of cultural analysis and the kind of political analysis that I kind of put on the table. Although I worked with colleagues around a cultural political economy. But Simon's absolutely right. But if, let's say we go to the United States at the current time, essentially equality, diversity, all of those are basically being wiped out of the institution. So, you know, many of my colleagues in the United States have actually taken down their CVs. They know that their courses are being monitored. Now, some of that, you know, pluralizing, thinking of different cultures and kind of acknowledgements of that in our kind of teaching pedagogy curriculum and things like that came actually because there was cultural diversity, people coming together from all over the world, that kind of thing. So we've got a deeply intrusive state who's actually managing particular narratives around nationalisms and the nation, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think Simon's right. This is where I would kind of sit, is that what those in the academy, many of them are very nervous, very anxious. I had to run a big conference in America down in Miami, CIES, and it was unbelievably controversial to try and do that, to actually keep discussions even around Israel, Palestine, and those, you know, as part of our kind of conversations and what do we want to think. But essentially, I would want to argue that the academy has got to kind of feel brave, and those in positions of power in the academy, and particularly our senior professors, administrators, you know, leadership and things like that. And there are calls, I think, World University News is actually trying to push some of those arguments. You've done that, Simon, anyway, too. So I think the onus is on us to do two things. One is do good analysis, and then do good advocacy. Okay, but you can't do advocacy without good analysis. And I think though it feels odd for us to be talking about things like empire and imperialism, all those kinds of things. I mean, the Scots know that they are a colony within a nation, and so do the Welsh. So it's not that empires don't have internal colonies either. But it would be part of actually, I think, the work we need to do as scholars of higher education, and to think of universities. Just one final comment I did want to make is, like recovering a tarnished, a reputation. Germany did that post-war. DAAD was created to try and actually think differently about the sciences that were taking place in Germany. So it didn't look as if it was science that had been colonized for extermination as it had been in the Second World War, Germany and so on. So lots of different countries do this kind of, Fulbright and Guardian, but for sometimes different purposes.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah.
Okay, in terms of, you said the curriculum are different from province to province, because I got my PhD from UBC and I did my research in BC before, and now I'm located in Alberta. So I know the differences between the two provinces. I'm just going to talk about that because a lot of things are very similar. If you look at the secondary, high school social studies, for example, very similar topics and discussion and the positionality. But to me, and even because I did also study with the parents, immigrant parents, they reported that, when they look at the social studies curriculum, let's say grade 10, and they can't see the representation of the children in those reading materials and also in the textbook. So in a sense, it's quite Eurocentric curriculum. And then the parents want to, to say when I talk to my children, where are they represented? Not only in the curriculum, also in the media, always negative news about, for example, China, about they blame China for everything in Canada now. If there's a technology breakdown, there must be Chinese people, they did it remotely, right? So it's a negative representation in the media. When you talk about the cultural differences, then I'm just going to use this group of students I just interviewed. There's actually one student from Germany, and when we asked them about racism experience, and she's fully aware because I'm a white and I don't need to experience racism. Actually, her parents, she was 16 years old, advised her not to associate with other international students, because they have bad English and bad culture, that kind of thing. So there are some cultural differences as well. But the majority of my student participants are coming from Asia, and also another thing is a lot of white peers cannot distinguish whether you are Chinese, you are South Vietnamese or Southeast Asia. They blame them all. You are Chinese, you bring the virus to school. So there's also this looping people together, and they become the weakness as well. That's another thing emerged from the data. And then it happened not only inside the school, but also outside in transit, because a lot of them take in public buses to go to school. So in buses, people told them on their face. And also in the railway, there was a student who was stabbed into his arm, right? Go back. They were told, go back to your country. Why are you here? So very, very serious racism they are experiencing.
Okay, thank you, Yan. So Susie, can I invite you to say whether you would like to add anything to this discussion?
Yes, I just wanted to.
Okay, you're muted probably.
Yeah. Oh, can you not hear me? I've got my microphone on.
So, yeah, we can't hear you. Okay, well, we'll come back to you. Would like to add
Okay.
anything? No, okay. So in terms of your question, Andrew, I think it's important to make the curriculum, I think, integrate some of the anti-racism content into it. I think I have done a green guide, a practical guide for the Society for Teaching, Learning, Higher Education in Canada. I can share some of that in terms of knowing your students, make your curriculum reflect of the students population you're working with, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think more essentially, I think is conceptually, we need to go beyond multiculturalism, I think particularly for Canada, and I think recognize racism is alive, is living well, and is still existing, and we tend to deny. So racism does not exist within multicultural Canada. We always think it's something to do with the southern neighbor in the United States. I think that denial go beyond that denial, naming it and make sure that's reflected in your teaching practices is very important. So I did another piece called Beyond Multiculturalism, particularly proposed a model of anti-racism education. So we can share some of that particularly afterwards. But thank you for the comments. So can you make another try? No?
I've got my mic on.
Yeah, it looks like it's muted for whatever reason. But
Must be China.
Okay.
Must be China.
I don't know if do you.
Okay, all right. So thank you, Susie. I'm sorry, but thank you all for sticking around for the discussion. So thank you. Okay, see you,
Thank
Susie.
you.
I'm sorry. For some reasons, we couldn't hear you the last bit.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah.
Okay,
Well, now
now,
I can hear you.
Yeah, I think there was something wrong with your speakers. The
Yeah,
sound
now
was
I
coming
can
on.
hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's all right. I did
all
have
right,
a couple
we
comments.
see you in Vancouver in May.
Yes, we'll see you
Yeah.
there. All right,
Okay.
thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
Bye.
Okay.
yeah.
Take
See
care
you
then.
in Vancouver.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, from Calgary.
Yeah. From Calgary. Both graduates,
Also based in Canada.
Wow. UCL. It's education. UCL doing just education. Bachelor from UBC. Business.
Okay.
But I left Monday evening.
Yes, I worked at Slaughter, and so we worked on program and implementation.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go in that comes after. So I worked with them.
I did my master's at the same time.
Okay, I recognize this supervisor.
I left the 17th and it's like, yeah, I think I came here last year and there seems to be like a big presence from Canada.
No, okay, yeah, he teaches comparative and international perspectives higher education, which is a placement course for real time and use comparative education. But similar.
We had that and it was like, we just like all the codes. Shannon.
To visit people in Winnipeg or?
I'm going after the World Cup this summer.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, that's interesting, right?
Vancouver, Toronto, so I'll go to Vancouver for about a week.
Okay.
Winnipeg for another week to see the cats. Yeah, have you been back? Going back to Calgary after this?
Yes. Remember after yes, after the so we'll stick around.
Good yesterday in the
How lovely.
club college you stay in.
Yes.
Very good. Second year.
She's not a Manchester, but she's a Manchester, right? Whatever it is.
You mean nationality? Is there any threshold here the analysis? I'm I'm helping, I'm teaching students
The higher education is now business cards.
and also doing homework class for new migrants.
I can also do
Greater
the photo.
Manchester.
Yes.
So you take a train
No, I live in Manchester. I drive. So I rarely come to the department. I only come for supervision. Maybe one of
you are actually
days.
based in Manchester.
So, and we have a big cohort of refugee community from East
My
Africa,
question
from
got a little bit
from
carried
Syria,
away. I meant cross-cultural comparison.
So how many students do you have?
I do have around,
Yeah.
The sample of
I do the homework around, I would say like around
culture
30 to 40 students.
more race.
Across primary,
So,
secondary.
compare that to,
Yeah,
or even in
I'm helping with the parents, for example, and COVID-19 has been a
they,
big factor in terms of IT, in terms of access, in terms of support, and the effect is still around. Yeah, developmental and academic.
that was kind of my question. Is like, is there cross-country or cross-cultural comparison? Where is the top?
There's the redneck country, right?
Because at that time, I think there was a little.
Just a lot of money on.
Sorry.
So let's say it's a referendum, looking at
Now.
expenses of.
Yes, yeah.
In terms of
I see some of them are limited.
You did your degree here?
So.
Scary thing is there is.
Right? And then you want education.
cultural appropriation.
So.
Oil and gas sector, and they went.
It's very like people with
Yeah, you know, that
cultural influence.
University
Yeah, and I think that's why, like, yeah, a lot of people don't see the value of seeking those services. They're not responding. It's not culturally appropriate. It's social. I feel like, yeah, it's not helping.
Quantitative research.
And also, because I know, for example,
In education, for sure. Rachel.
But unfortunately, I have done a little, so in terms of my stuff,
But I think
I'm not wrong, I travel from,
Because I was talking to other people in our congregation who also applied it, they're also here.
right? So it's like,
Yeah.
And then I talked to someone who actually one of them that was posted. Like,
here's
what's that?
that
Frequently.
you just go
But
to
you have
school
to
and
the jobs that
that
you
is
see
so
that you
easy,
can.
right?
That's right.
What are you talking about?
We're looking at,
Looking at the university ones, because again, those are ones where like they posted it, it's only up for like 3 weeks. So it's like, yeah, I feel like, if you're also.
They were initially very elective.
Yeah, more specialist, that makes
Because
sense. Yeah.
that's like say, I don't want to.
pleasure to be here.
It's I've only been here for
So.
today, so.
The same thing back. Looking forward. But anything physical, people know. Anything mental.
Which ones are you going?
Yeah.
I need.
Last year.
Yeah. But now I can walk with no problem. Because you can see. Like that.
You know, and
I think that's. Was that
and then it says hello.
So it's nice to know you. Yeah, so sorry for me talking about
Oh, okay. Oh,
And the children,
Yes.
you know, it's not
I'm kind of split. I gotta go eat. I'm sorry.
I'll see you there.
Yeah, see you around.
Okay, all right.
Before
Thank you.
that,
I mean, there's so many
holistic
great
approach.
things happening, and then I'll let you.
Yeah, parents, even the children, the language, the content, the context. I know what you're saying. I think the same thing is happening. Even with autistic, for example, special need diagnosis
Second, this
is affecting that cultural, for example. People are not willing to admit.
yeah.
My children are not being supported, and the system does not recognize the problem unless the parent is there. You have to fight for,
Exactly.
for these things to go through. If the parents are not there to support or to sign off or to give feedback or to,
But for autism, another issue is the multiple
I'll send you the.
diagnosis.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the
Intervention.
parents initially, they were confused, like, listen, just took my child to see a doctor once, and then that's enough. And then some.
Yeah, I don't know what's
one
happening.
of
I
the
think my
parents-
phone had it. Yeah, just delete that. Okay, perfect.
With the doctors for 18
I understand that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's psychologists, there's occupational therapists, there's child, for example, like healthy, there's family doctors, there is those, for example, like outreach programs.
There's a lot of.
There's a lot. Physiotherapy, for example, like, yeah. So all those things have to have a report
Shared searching.
and then bring together and then input within the diagnosis for them to have a plan of action. Yeah, and so it's very tiring.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's psychologically daunting.
Yeah, Bill University.
Okay,
But thank you, it's good to see you.
That's what I learned from yeah, that's right, from a colleague at Kellogg College, and who speaks French. But anyhow, so
I was saying, I was surprised by
That's
that.
all the
The
French
Canada
knows.
president. It's impressive.
That's all the French knows.
La pêche. So not many people really know that much, right? So people just say, yeah, bien, très bien. Right. All right, let's
And we're off.
go.
I love your content. Your race and international.
That would be, which is really, that's not, I have any time. I love that you do it. Let's give you some. Yeah. Oh, I'm prepared. I'm so sorry.
What are they?
No.
They are.
Not actually Monday. Oh, man. Oh. Let me clean it up a little bit. Back. Let me clean this up. Try to open it up. How to connect with the screen? Can I use my laptop? I guess I can use my laptop because I saw the picture. They can use it. I think this is for the projection. Okay. So how about the screen? Let me see. Yeah. So I'm the same as you. Yeah. Okay. Turn on the room. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's on now.
So how do we arrange ourselves?
I tried to find the cupboard, but not sure. Maybe we can sit first, and then after presentation we come to sit together.
Together, right?
Or we can sit here, but if we sit here, we come to look at the slides.
Yeah.
True. That's technical thing. I'm not sure
bit.
where the cupboard
I can.
for the screen. I'm not sure because it's very short. This one, so I'm not sure.
Are we using your laptop?
Yeah, I think
Yes.
so.
Give me your laptop.
Yeah. Can I
I can take this out.
start from the user? Right. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. So, but how we can? I mean, so we need to because I saw the people put the laptop here and they sit and they can still present, but the couple is very short.
Yes, I understand your concern.
Oh.
It is.
I'm sure the people that just put the laptop here, but like. Oh, you mean you want to move the laptop?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what people. Maybe we can move the table.
Yeah, we can move this. Yep, we can move this.
Oh, okay. Maybe we put this no, like here, so we are not occupy the. So we sit like here. Can you do this?
Okay, and where do you want this can?
Just this way, and then we don't. I mean, people can see the screen. Okay.
Sure.
Not too square like this. Yeah, but not too square because you would block people. So like this.
Yeah,
So it's. So is it okay? Like we stand here, but I'm sure people like put the laptop here. They can
See, as well. No.
You want to remove this?
Like
Like
this.
this. Okay. Yeah.
So we need
No, it's a- yeah. 5. Because
Why
Kwan is a video. So there's one more.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, yeah. I think it's came today. Yes.
This one is so busy.
Jules, can I ask?
Sure. What? What do you want? What do you need?
We have the video.
Because the ground is not here, so
Sure.
it has to be connected.
Connected, and then the loudspeaker can so I don't know because it's set up for the people.
There will be someone from Oxford coming
Yeah.
to help with that, so
Okay,
maybe
that's
we
great.
can ask her.
Yeah.
There is a,
It's set up for.
there is a student.
Yeah.
No, this is not for teaching. This is for normal teaching.
Right.
It's the same in our university. But the sound, the system would have to go to this loudspeaker.
Yeah.
It's not online. This is
Let's see.
there will be someone. You know how to deal with it to make the sound.
How are you?
Thank you so much for supporting this group to get here today.
No, it's my pleasure.
Very much appreciate all your efforts in bringing us
Nice to
together.
see you too.
Nice to see you too.
Fix it out,
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is looking good.
It's not. I don't know how it works. I tried the volume and see. Can you try again, Kian? I think I know. Yeah, the output, yeah.
Just popped into a coffee I've seen for about 15 years.
My PhD students were coming.
Yeah.
No.
Let's see. Can you try?
Yeah.
My PhD students were they're coming together. Yes. She's
Can you try here? Can you try this?
I missed that session. Which room? Okay. But this room is the same.
Yeah.
I know, it's so stuck with the face.
Yes, you have to ask someone.
Yeah.
That was yesterday.
Who's doing?
Did you join the session with Emily Hennessy?
Educational models.
Here you go.
Vietnamese soil. The Vietnamese German University was established in 2008. The Vietnam France University.
It was
Over the past 2 decades, Vietnam has. between
And you play the
world-class
slides without
aspiration
your
and equitable access, the
play the slides
dynamics of
without your
Vietnam binational
No,
university.
because I did that. I only had one slide, and then the next person.
Over the
The Vietnamese stand initially they created Peace University to raise quality of the entire higher education system. But these universities themselves
universities.
Yes, then it is the same jacket.
Over the
Even
past 2
true.
decades, Vietnam has developed a differentiated international higher education model
You must get a
through
picture
the
before we
establishment of binational university
leave.
training world-class aspirants.
Yes.
Oh, you'll be great then.
Yes, you're setting up the stage. It's for it. And then I didn't listen out. I come so here. I decided yes, speaking here. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm going to put that on why the comment like that, and then just basically say that we do that, and then we have four papers.
Sure,
So, otherwise, case study is it's not really four case study.
Yes.
That we just say four papers.
Four papers, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Four papers, and then the first one is binational university because and then the second one is we look at dual what the program between the UK and Soviet university.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And then the third one we call the role of education agent, and the last one the young generation they need. So that is, and then I will ask each of you to introduce yourself.
Right, right.
And whoever's looking what out order you want to say that you
Yeah.
just say your name, affiliation.
Sure.
2 sentences, and then to play the video.
Yeah, you start.
I think 9 minutes, but she said 14, but I hope it's 9 minutes. So because Quang
You
pre-recorded
can
it.
cut it whenever you want.
No, I can't cut it.
I mean, you stop it whenever you want. It's not, it's incoherent. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he sent you like the video. How long? Because he recorded it, he said to me, he shoot the middle one, and I also do the first one and 2 last one, and then did the middle one.
Yeah.
That's fine. I think it's just
That's fine,
even
yeah.
it's so
That's
many
just,
longer. Yeah, it means that we agree that each 10 minutes, but each one is 40.
Sure,
So,
yeah.
But I think he had. But I tried to stick to the because.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
finger with one.
Yeah.
So, and then everyone. The 10 minutes.
Yes.
Oh, I need to be very quick then.
No,
Yeah.
mine is also like, I'm done in 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, but I saw yours. Maybe the pilot thing you have to be quite. Yeah, I think.
That's important, I think. Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah, you should put it first.
Sure. Or
No, maybe this is like put it first.
you should,
That's what we're talking about.
well, we can just forward and then we go backward.
Okay.
Yeah, or there, or you can just go ahead, Ken, lift it up. Okay, perfect.
That's fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's fine. I didn't have a picture, or maybe I did. Maybe I did, but I didn't see. But I should. Yeah, I should.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know if I have time. Should I?
You should. I'm more than happy. When the air drops, it says, hey. Whatever goes in now, you can see it. Oh, okay. My research. Yeah. You can not that one. Or you can delete that one. Yeah. Can you read it from your?
I'll try to add the photos.
Are we here? Are we all here? So here.
Yes. So okay, I'll show you. I'll show you, Sarah. So right after here, I come out with some of mine, and then just this, and this, and then I'm done. Yeah, that's the paper. The actual paper.
The printout.
The printout. Out. I didn't know. Oh, you printed it out. Yes. Okay. So. Are you sitting there? Are you sitting there? Okay.
Good afternoon and welcome to the panel on social mobility and equitable access to international higher education who get the chance to go global. So our panel today will have 4 papers. But first of all, my name is Quay Anh Dak and I'm assistant professor based at Coventry University. And I'm very delighted to convene this panel and also very delighted to see many of you on a Friday afternoon here, including my very special person at my professor, my PhD supervisor, Professor Susan Robertson in the room. Higher education, particularly international higher education, has long been regarded as a key pathway to social mobility. Yes, the relationship between educational access and genuine equity remain deeply contested. Previous research already revealed that there can be a trade-off in education policy. The system that aim to give everyone fair chance, for example, providing funding to a university equally, or provide additional support for disadvantaged students, tend to enable more people move up in society. By contrast, systems that concentrate resources on top performing students or heavily fund selective university may raise performance, but often benefit small number of people who already in an advanced group. But these tensions are further complicated in the context of international higher education, where access is shaped by different structural factors such as national policy, funding mechanism, geopolitical dynamics, institutional partnership, admission criteria, and increasingly marketization of higher education, especially in Southeast Asia. And many of our papers touch upon this point. At the same time, different actors, including government, university, education agents, and students themselves, exercise varying degree of agency in navigating and reshaping these structures. And most of our papers here mention different degree of agency that different actors plays or navigate in navigating this structural issue. our panels explore four main areas. The first one, we look at binational university in Vietnam and access to the very special type of university. The second paper, we look at Co2Tel PhD, which is collaborative PhD program between the UK and several country, including the Global North and Global South partner. The third paper, we will explore the role of education agent in facilitating access to study opportunity in the UK. Finally, our colleague will look at the very special program, Young Southeast Asian Leader Initiative, funded by the US. So now I would like to introduce all the presenter speaker. Could you introduce your name, your affiliation, and one sentence about your work? Gio, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jo Wang, and I'm a department lecturer at University of Oxford in Oxford School of Global and Area Studies. So today my presentation, sorry, is not about Wisely. It's the presentation I gave the day before yesterday. So today's presentation is about less privileged students from Southeast Asia, how they navigate the very unequal international higher education space. So that is my today's presentation. I'm the fourth one to present.
Hello everyone, I'm Chang, and I'm in my final year of my PhD at University of Liverpool, hopefully. And my PhD focused on the class diversity of Vietnamese student mobility to the UK, and I'm interested in the question whether their social class background shape their experience and aspiration to the UK. But today's presentation, I'm going to focus on the role of Asians within the existing social inequality in Vietnam.
The dilemma
So
of Vietnam Binational University.
I'm going to be the third presenter today.
I'm Sarah Patrick. I'm a part-time PhD student at Coventry University, and I'm also an international research degree programs manager at Coventry University. I'm partway through my PhD, looking at the lived experience of students on Co2Tel, international Co2Tel through award programs. Yet to do my data collection, but sharing some of the literature review and initial pilot study findings.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Drew Elepaño. I'm also a PhD student at Coventry University. Maybe just wanted to take the opportunity to say that there are 3 generations of PhDs here
in the room.
So Sarah and I are the PhD students of Hue An. So we have the whole lineage here. So yeah.
We actually have one more presenter who is online. We probably need some technical support to how to get him online, but I can introduce him. He's Quang, and he's a lecturer at Vietnam National University. He's online, and therefore we recorded our video presentation. And the first paper would be about 3 binational university in Vietnam. It's a very special type of transnational education. And in our presentation, we're going to explain how special it is and what implication it has on students' social mobility, and also the privilege of who can get a chance to study in these binational universities.
Just turn on the video.
Yeah, we'll do that.
It's like
She needs to share it. Yeah, the online people can share. We'll do that.
you need to log on the join team or